Sanbanan Dumlang, hello, it's me, Sviso, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast, Simply Do the Work. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for the support on my return to YouTube and the podcast. It's really motivating and it's inspiring me, to continue doing this because I was a little unsure if people still even cared. But like my latest video, last I checked, had like more than 500 views, which is like so mind-blowing to me, and even the support on the podcast has just been phenomenal so far. So thank you so much. Please do keep on tuning in, share the podcast, and give the podcast a rating wherever you're listening to. So without further ado, let us just dive into today's episode. As you can tell by the title, I'll be telling you guys why I'm going back to church. Now, in the previous episode, I did give a little bit of a life update, but I didn't tell you guys one of the biggest changes in my life, which is me going back to church. Now, anyone who's known me knows that, church and Christianity have always been a huge part of my life, but in more recent years, my relationship with the faith and even the institution have been quite complicated. And I spoke about this in the episode I released 3 years ago titled Why I Left the Church. And the reasons that I stated for leaving the church, they're still valid even today. Like, I still fully agree and stand by what I said. I still think the church is a flawed institution. People need to leave their churches, but it's not that simple, So let's unpack why I went back, because I am a complicated, sometimes self-contradicting human being. So the first reason is simply purely loneliness. Now, this year I started working. I'm in a new city, which is like 600 k's away from my family. Like, I literally know no one here. And so I found myself being bored on the weekends. I found myself also, feeling lonely, not knowing what to do with myself. And I remember just taking a moment just to think back, okay, how did I adjust in the transition from high school to university, right? From adolescence into young adulthood. And I realized that, one of the things that helped me was church. Because I quickly, because then I was still a lot more in my religious bag than I am, I guess, now. Or let's say I did differently, right? So one of the first things was I looked for a church. And I visited a couple of churches. I remember joining. There was like a prayer group thing at my race. I remember joining that for a while, and while I was still trying to find myself and find my people, the church did serve as like a buffer, like a sort of a constant source of social interaction. Even once I did eventually find a church I'd call home at that time, right? I'd go to church every week, and then I started, becoming more active. I started volunteering, going to connect groups, going to conferences. So like a big bulk of my social life was church. But, by the time eventually I did leave the church, for the reasons I stated in that episode, which you guys should check out, by the way, by the time I did leave the church, I had already built another life outside of the church. So, it wasn't just like a huge vacuum. I mean, initially, yes, there was a bit of adjusting, because I did find myself missing the community, missing the people. But there's still some people who I met during my time in church that I'm still in touch with. We still talk and check in on each other from time to time. And so, speaking about community, right, I realized that if I want to do any meaningful work, I need to be plugged into a community, right? I don't just want to be that person who reads the right books, listens to all the podcasts, and knows all the right things in my head, and maybe shares the right thing on my social media, but I'm not actually doing it. I'm not actually doing something tangible. And although the church does have a complicated history of inflicting violence in the name of God, or claiming to be doing good, like missionary work and all of that stuff, I mean, there's no denying that churches do also play a role in social justice work, right? Churches do play a role in bettering communities. And so I figured, if I can find a church that can also help me plug into the community, especially as someone who is now coming to this community and I don't really know anyone, I feel like a church would be also a good way to understand, okay, what is happening in this area? How can I be a part of it? And also, the third reason is, I wanted to have people that share my faith that I know IRL. As much as I appreciate and love the online spaces I've been able to be a part of, where I can grow and learn about faith and spirituality, and even those have been very beneficial in my journey of deconstructing my faith and getting my faith to where it is today. I miss having people who I know face to, I can have personal face-to-face conversations, and just having that in-person community, I think, is really, really important. So, taking all of the above into consideration, I had a few prerequisites for the church that I would ultimately decide to join. First and foremost, it had to be a queer affirming and progressive church because although I don't think like my queer identity is the beginning and end of who I am, it does play a huge major role in my life. And I wouldn't be in a church where I'm going to constantly ask, when are you going to get married, meaning like heterosexual marriage, or people ask like, where's your girlfriend, when are you going to bring a wife. Like I didn't want to have, and have to explain all of that or feel like I have to hide that portion of my life. Because I remember when the previous church I was at, I remember seeing someone at a pride event and like, oh hey, I know you from church. I remember damn near having a panic attack. But now I remember the thing after, like, okay, why am I freaking out because someone from church saw me at pride? I mean, clearly, if they're also there, that means they're also, But, it's that thing. I don't want to have to compartmentalize that part of my life. Because I feel like for the longest time, even though I came to terms with my sexuality from, like, a relatively young age, around, like, age 16 or so, I mean, it would still take at least 4 or 5 years before I felt like, okay, I can start to integrate my faith and my sexuality. Like, they were always it was like my sexuality here, my faith here, and then let's not even get into like the gender identity stuff, because that's like a whole other can of worms we're not going to get into right now. But I wanted I wanted to go to a church space. I know that that part of me is affirmed and not just tolerated, right? It's affirmed, it's celebrated. And just overall, wanted a church that, whose beliefs and values more or less align with my own. And also just wanted to really just follow my gut and intuition, Now, I recognize that there's no such thing as a perfect church. I don't want to be too close-minded in my search. I was like, especially, taking into consideration, the country I'm living in and like the area I'm living in. I knew that, that like, although overseas, a certain, like the ideas that, I think might be found in a church overseas might not be available here. So I was like, I want to find the next best thing or the closest thing possible, right? So I looked up some churches. I've had some people recommend some churches to me, and some of them I was turned off before I even set foot in those churches. I think the beauty of, the times we're living in is that now, a lot of churches, they do have social media accounts. I think even because of the pandemic, a lot of churches, did also, after the pandemic, continue having online resources and online services and stuff, so I could actually like vet a lot of churches without actually having to go there and instantly get an idea, okay, this is what the church believes in, and even just okay, what, this church, as much as it looks like it could be a fun, great time, is not going to be a safe or conducive space for me, right? In fact, there's actually a progressive church I visited earlier in the year, and despite it being perfect on paper, like on the website they were saying all the right things, I just felt like, it just wasn't a safe space for me. If you guys know, one of the things that made me ultimately leave the church was listening to my body and listening to how my body was like physically reacting anxiously before having to go to church. And with this progressive church, I had a similar thing happen to me. It was like the night before I had to attend a service, I couldn't fall asleep. And I was just like so anxious, like my heart was racing, my body, I was just not okay. And so I got out of bed, decided to sit down, journal and meditate and figure out, okay, what is going on? And there is no, my body is literally in fight or flight mode, because it recognizes it's going to that place. And although they were progressive and queer affirming, some of the theology that they taught was like a little bit like triggering and kind of toxic to me. And so I moved. I was like, you know what, this is not the place for me. And I recognized that I can't just walk into a church and tell them to change this and that and the third, Though I think there is a role for people inside their churches, to call them out. Sometimes also you need to just leave, you just need to walk away, And this was one of those situations. It's like, you know what? The people are nice, it's great, it's cute, it's not for me. It's not for me. And so I found a new church right now. It's still early days, only been going for a couple of weeks, but I'm loving it. I'm actually really loving it. It's actually a funny story about my first time going to that church. So I found this church online, right? And so I went there with an Uber. I remember I got off the Uber, and when I got off the Uber, I just heard church music playing from a building and people walked. I just walked into that building, right? I walked in, people are greeting me like, "Hi, how are you?" I'm like, "I am Sfiso. Who came? Oh no, I came by myself." They're like, "Oh, okay, thank you. You're welcome. Sit down." So like the service hasn't started. It's still just like welcoming and people walking in. So when I get to my seat, I'm looking around and I notice the name. I'm like, "Wait a minute. This isn't the church I'm meant to be going to." I started looking around. I'm like, yeah, no, this is definitely not the church, because it's like it was very much reminiscent of the church that I had left like 4 years ago. I'm like, it's giving the same energy. I'm like, no, this cannot be the church. And I'm like, okay, how am I gonna leave? And so then the service starts. Like someone stands in the front. It's like, welcome everyone, welcome to church. Can we please all close our eyes and pray? And that's when I slipped out. I was like, okay, while they're praying, let me just walk out. And then as soon as I stepped out, I looked, like I turned to the right and I saw a few meters away, there was like a pride flag in front of a door. So I walked towards it and I'm like, and I said, okay, this looks like this probably looks like the church I'm going to. I asked them, hey, is this, insert name of the church? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, oh, okay, thank you, great, thank you so much. So I walked in and it was just amazing. Like the people are really nice. It is a rather smaller church than the church that I went to before, and even the church back home. It is rather smaller church, but I think I like that. It's intimate. Everyone knows each other. Like I think one of the downsides of going to a very big church is you can easily just be a number. You can easily just go to church every week and no one really knows you. Because you can get lost in those. So I'm not saying that like big churches intentionally go out of the way to forget people. It's just, it be like that sometimes. So, anyways, that is my story of why I'm going back to church. I know a lot of queer people of faith are longing for such community, and I hope they can find it. And I do hope that all the problematic, homophobic, misogynistic, racist churches, I still think they gotta go. They gotta fall. But I'm hoping that everyone who is longing for, a community of faith, a community where they can grow, where they can, find chosen family, especially for, I think of like the lot of queer people who have been rejected by their own families, they can find a place where they can be truly embraced for who they are, where it's truly come as you are and be accepted, and not like a lot of children. It's like, come as you are, but once you're here, you're gonna need to change everything about you. Like that's not the vibe you're after. So I have a really good feeling about this one. This is the beginning of a new phase in my life. Not phase, but like a new chapter. That's the word. A new chapter in my life, a new chapter in my journey of faith and spirituality. And I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes and sharing more with you guys on that journey. So until then, stay tuned, watch the space, and until we meet again, I love you so much. Bye, guys.